trial by fire. I know for the last few weeks the messages have been challenging. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing to be challenged. Because you know what? Unless you're challenged, you'll never know what you're made of. Y'all with me? If you're not challenged, you'll never know what you're made of. It does you no good to have strengths if they're never put to the test. It does you no good to have knowledge if it's never confronted, or to have anything that you possess. If it's not challenged, what good is it doing you? Like I've said before, although the last few weeks these messages have been a challenge, I must be first partaker of that. So I want you to know that. I would never stand up here and preach something to you that I don't first expect myself to go by, to live by, to adhere to. So it's just as much a challenge to me. We have to remember that the Lord doesn't ask us to assemble to entertain us as a congregation, but He assembles us to advance His army. So we're assembled here to be instructed in how to advance. An army, before they advance, they go through rigorous training. Am I right, veterans? Did you go through rigorous training? Did you have to hear things when you were training for military service that you didn't want to hear? Did you have to do things that you didn't want to do? Of course. Why? They were trying to develop you. All right? So the army of God is no different. The army of God is no different. There's going to be things we have to do. There's going to be things that we have to hear. We're going to have to come into alignment with and adhere to that we don't necessarily like, but it's part of our training. It's part of our military service. There are certain things that we'll have to have instilled that may be a harsh reality. There may be some weaknesses that have to be removed. So the only way to remove a weakness is how? To bring resistance against it, right? To provide. So if you have a weakness in your body, what do? If you have a particular limb that's weak, what do? You got to apply resistance to it. And it's in the resistance that you get stronger. Right? So for us to advance as an army of God, we have to face resistance. What good is faith if it's never exercised? How is faith developed if you don't ever exercise it? Faith is, never see faith as anything, as being different than a muscle. Think of it as like a muscle. Well, how do you get a muscle stronger? You can't feed it straight sugar. You got to feed it things that the mouth may not want to eat. Right? And then you got to exercise it. You got to put resistance to it. So faith, if you want your faith stronger, you got to exercise your faith. And you got to feed it the Word of God, whether it tastes sweet in the mouth or not. Yeah, I know. I don't want to hear that either. But it's true. Malachi 3:2. But who can endure the day of His coming? And who can stand when He appears? For He's like a refiner's fire and a launderer's soap. Look what our God is likened to. He's likened to a launderer's soap and a refiner's fire. A launderer's soap removes the impurities from the surface. God said, I want to remove the impurities from the surface of your life. Those things that you've picked up as you go through life. The things that have rubbed off on you. The things that have stained you. He said, I'm like a soap and I want to cleanse it. But then the word says He's like a refiner's fire. Well, you know what? A refiner's fire doesn't remove the things on the surface. It removes the things that are deep inside. It removes the things that are at the heart of the matter. The refiner's fire will remove the impurities from within. Those things that are ingrained in us. The wrong mindsets. The habitual things. The generational things. The character flaws. And we could go on and on. how does a refiner's fire work? I was a refiner. I worked in a refinery. I know how refinement takes place. You know how? Heat and pressure. Man, that's not good. I don't want heat, and I don't like pressure. But if the things that are deep inside of me are going to be removed, I'm going to have to be held over the heat. And there's going to have to be some pressure applied. Because if not, the flaws that are deep inside of me will never be removed. And I'll go through life stumbling over them. And I won't be an effective soldier in the army of God because there's flaws and there's weaknesses. If I was to be a member of an elite fighting force, which is what we're called to be, the last thing I want standing next to me is somebody full of character flaw. Right? Think about it. If you were in military service, and I had no idea this was going to shift this way, but this is how it's going. If you were in military service and you were part of an elite fighting group that's advancing, that's going on the front line, that's going before the front line, and preparing the way, which is what we're called to do, right? Wouldn't you want the people standing on each side of you to be men or women of integrity? Do you want a lot of character flaws there? No, because that's a weakness that can affect you. So as we move forward, this elite fighting group that we're called to be, God's got to work out the character flaws that we each one may have. He's got to work out the generational things. He's got to work out the mindsets. And how's he going to do it? Heat and pressure. I wish there was another way. But that's how he does it. By heat and by pressure. We have the covenant promises, and they're great. But we can never forget that the true purpose of the cross was to make us like Jesus. That was the true purpose of the cross. Yes, it came with a whole bunch of promises. When Jesus said, Father, it's finished, what was he saying? 7,500 promises are stamped, yes and amen. But that was a side effect. The true purpose of the cross was to make us like Jesus. Because if I'm not like Jesus, I don't have eternal life. And if I'm not like Jesus, the 7,500 promises don't matter. Because I can't properly manifest them in my life anyway. And if they were manifest, if I'm full of character flaws, they'll destroy me. So to have the 7,500 plus promises benefit my life, I better be conformed to the image of Christ. Well, what is the image of Christ? If I'm going to be like Jesus, what's Jesus like? He's righteous and he's holy. He's righteous and he's holy. Look, the righteousness that we have was imparted to us by faith. By faith, Abraham believed unto righteousness, right? We believe unto righteousness. So by my faith in the finished work of Jesus on the cross, by the faith in the empty tomb, I take on the very righteousness of Christ. In Christ, I have the righteousness of God. Isn't that what the Scripture said? So the righteousness that we need to be like Jesus is imparted unto us through faith, but not holiness. But not holiness. Just because I'm righteous, just because I believed unto righteousness, that doesn't mean I'm holy. And if I'm not holy, then the promises of God will destroy me, because I'll use them in a way that God never intended me for me to use them. You know, being financially blessed is great, but if you can't handle it, it'll destroy you. And God's not going to stand by and let you be destroyed. So he'll withhold that promise from you, although you have Scripture that says you can have it. But you can't have it without holiness, because it'll destroy you. And we could go on and on through all of the promises. So the holier I become, the more he can trust me with. Got that? The holier I become, the more I look like Jesus. The holier I become, the more I reveal the glory of God. The holier I become, the more people's life I affect in a positive way. The holiness that we need is perfected in us by crucifying the flesh and by trials of fire. I crucify my flesh by not being led by my flesh, but being led by the Spirit of God. But the trial by fire, I can't run away from. Does that make sense to you? I can't run away from the trial. I can't get out from underneath the pressure. I can't wiggle out from underneath the pressure and be content with my flaws. I have to allow myself to remain there until God does a work in me that He desires to do. If you keep that in mind, that me becoming like Jesus is God's top priority, then it removes a whole lot of anxiety when we go through fire. Anybody ever been in the fire? I'm not talking about physical. I'm talking about the trials and the fires of life. I'm talking about when pressure's applied to you. I'm talking about when it feels like all hell's coming against you. You ever been there? It's fun, isn't it? Woo-hoo! Just give me more of that. No. But when I'm in that, if I can keep in my mind that what God's desire for my life is for me to become more like Jesus, that removes a whole lot of the anxiety that I deal with when I'm there. And if I can realize that although I'm in this place that I despise, God's here with me. Because His promise is He'll never leave me and He'll never forsake me, and I'm not going through this alone, and I'm not saying God put you there. I am not saying that God put you in that situation. But what I am saying is God won't waste it. He will use it. I'm not saying He brings the fire. I'm not saying that He brings the pressure. But what I am saying is when you find yourself under pressure, when you find yourself in the fire, God's not going to waste the opportunity to pull an impurity out of you. He's not going to waste the opportunity to let the impurity rise so He can skim it off. If we allow Him. If we allow Him. A refiner of gold places the gold in the fire, and as the gold becomes molten, the impurities rise to the top and they're skimmed off. And this process continues until the refiner can see his own image reflecting in the gold. Isn't that neat? So that refiner can tell when the impurities are gone from the gold, as he stands over it, scraping off the impurities, when he starts to see his own reflection in the gold, then he knows, man, it's pure. Oh, you're made in the likeness and image of God, but we've all got some stuff in us that needs to be refined out, right? And the more we refine it out, and God's standing, watching us in the fire, watching us under the pressure, as impurities rise to our life, and He skims to the top of our life, and He skims them away, and He starts to say, oh, I can start to see myself. Oh, and then when He gets to see Himself so clear, the pure gold's removed from the fire. It makes the fire more bearable. If we can remember, God's just trying to get me to where He can see His reflection in my life. And if I can just stay in this fire, although it's uncomfortable to my body, if I can just stay under this pressure, although I disdain it, the image of God's going to be revealed in my life. I'm going to start to look more like my Father moment by moment as I'm in this fire, as I allow Him to remove the things that are contaminating me, as He removes the things that are making me less and less pure. 2 Corinthians 4:4. Whose minds the God of this age has blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them. What's he saying? If the God of this age, and that's Satan, can blind you to the truth, if he can get you to believe that God has forsaken you, if he can get you out of the peace of God when you're going through a rough time, when you're going through a rough time, and I know we all have, some maybe now, but if If the devil can remove you from God's peace in that situation, he can keep God's image from shining through you. Does that make sense? Let that sink in. If when you're going through pressure and heat, if the devil can convince you that God has forsaken you there, and that's why you're there. You're in this place because God walked out on you. God, don't you know? Don't you remember? Don't you remember who I am? You said you'd never leave me, forsake me, but you seem like you're a million miles away. I feel like I'm going through this trial alone. And if the devil can get you to buy into that, the image of God cannot be revealed through you. But if you can stay in that place and keep the peace about you, knowing that this too will pass and my God will never walk out on me, then you can keep a peace and the image of God starts to shine through you. Daniel 3, verses 1 through 30. Y'all going to bear with me through 30? All right. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and whose width was 6 cubits. And he set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon. And King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather together his satraps and administrators, the governors and the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates. And they dedicated, to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, the advisors, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the province gathered together for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood up before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald cried out aloud, "To you it is commanded, O people of the nation and languages, that at the time you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the psaltery, the symphony, with all kinds of music, you should fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast immediately into the midst of a fiery furnace." The world is always trying to get you to bow down. The world is always trying to get you to bow down to something. To the ways of this world, to a world system. And if you refuse, or when you refuse, you will go through fire. You will make people mad. When you refuse to do it their way, the way that it's so common, and you say, "I'm not doing it that way," people are going to rise up against you. Just how it's going to happen. I'm just telling you how it is. And you will go through a trial. God says so. So at the time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the harp, the lyre, the symphony, and all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at the time, certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. And they spoke to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the music," let's just go with music, "shall fall down and worship the gold image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast in the midst of the burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not paid due regard to you. They do not serve your gods or worship your gold image that you set up." Thank God. Thank God. Thank God that there's some men willing to stand up and say, "You know what? I'm not bowing down. You know what? I'm not doing what you said. I'm faithful to my God no matter what you say." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, gave the command to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I've set up?" Now, if you're ready at this time, when you hear the music and you fall down and you worship the image that I have made, well then good. But if you do not worship you will be cast immediately into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you from my hands? Challenged. Who is this God who will deliver you from my hand? Don't you know who I am? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. Remind you of somebody? And Jesus opened not his mouth. Their life's on the line. All they got to do is bow to an image. How big of a deal is that? Look, the king came to them and bargained with them. Look, guys, I've given you authority over this kingdom. All you have to do is just bow down. We don't even have to tell anybody. Nobody even has to know. But just bow down and all will be well. But if not, you're going to die. You're going to lose your life. You're going to be burned to death. Don't you care? We don't even, it's not even worth a response from us. Man, to have that kind of faith. I want to believe I do, but you know what? I've never had the gun put to my forehead. I've never been faced with a situation quite like that. I've been faced with some humiliation, some insults. I've been faced with some people saying things. But never has my life been on the line. I want to say I could stand up to that, but I don't know because I've never been tested in it yet. If that is the case, he's talking about being thrown in the furnace. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But look at this. But if not, they said that's where our faith is. We know he's able. But if he's not willing to, nevertheless. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, nor will we worship your gold image, which you've set up, even if my God doesn't come through for me. Even if the outcome's not what I thought it should be. Nevertheless. Then Nebuchadnezzar was full of fury, and the expression on his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And he spoke and commanded that they heat the fiery furnace 7 times hotter than it was usually heated. And he commanded certain mighty men of valor who were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and cast them into the burning furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their trousers, their turbans, and their other garments. And they were cast into the midst of the fiery furnace. Therefore, because the king's command was urgent, the furnace was exceedingly hot. The flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose in haste, and he spoke, saying to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? Didn't we just throw 3 men in there? And they answered and said, O king, that is true. Look, he answered, I see 4 men, and they're not bound, but they're loose, and they're walking in the midst of the fire, and they're not hurt. And the form of the other is like the Son of God. The only thing he got wrong there was he said the 4th man in the furnace looks like the Son of God. He wasn't the 4th man in there. If he'd have been the 4th man, the first 3 would have died. He had to be the first one in it. He was in there already waiting on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning furnace, and he spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Just a minute ago it was, who's this God? Who's going to deliver you from it? Now all of a sudden he's the Most High God. Come out. Come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together. And they saw these men whose body the fire had no power over. The hair of their head was not even singed, nor were their garments affected. And the smell of fire was not even on them. They didn't even smell like smoke. Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I bet he did. Who sent his angel and delivered the servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and have yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any God except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut to pieces. We're going to stop there. Everything changed. Everything changed. Remember, when you read anything in the Old Testament, always look for the picture that it's painting for us in the New Testament. You may never face a king that's made a decree that if you don't bow, you'll be thrown into a fiery furnace. But you do walk out into a world that has established its ways of doing things. And if you don't bow to it and submit to it, they will cast you in some type of fire. They will bring fire against you. They will bring accusations against you. The pressure will come upon you to bow. But look how it turned out for these guys. Look at the victory that they got by not bowing. This isn't easy. This is a struggle. This is a struggle. Because you know what? Sometimes it's just easy to do it the way the world does it. Sometimes it's easier to just do it the way the world says to do it than to wait on God. I'm preaching to me. Sometimes it's easier to just apply for the loan than it is to trust God for the finances. Am I against loans? No, not all the time. But sometimes it's just the easy way out. And we've never really trusted God in the first place for it. Because after all, I know I can get it this way. But God might be saying, you know, if you just wait on me, it'll be so much better than doing it the way the world does it. That's just one scenario. Like I said, I'm preaching to me right now. I'm building myself up. I'm encouraging me. If you glean something from it, take it. These three young Hebrew men chose to not bow to the idols of Babylon, and it infuriated those around them. And they threw them into the fire. When you choose to not bow to the world's systems or the world's way of doing things, you'll also have to endure a trial by fire. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had to reckon themselves as dead before they were ever thrown into the furnace. They had already said, because their answer was what? If not. My God's able, and He's willing, but if not. So that if not was already reckoning themselves as dead. What they were saying was, right here, I'm surrendering my life. If He saves me, great. And if He doesn't, great. But right here, there's the line. It reminds me of a Garden of Gethsemane experience. I could call down legions of angels, but nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Right there, Jesus reckoned Himself as dead. I have to reckon myself as dead. or I won't surrender to the trial of fire. I won't allow myself. I'll look for an easy way out if I don't reckon myself as dead. Because when my flesh screams about what it wants to do, if I don't reckon it as dead, it will talk me out of stepping into a trial by fire. It will talk me right out of it. They thought that God was going to deliver them before they were thrown into the furnace. My God can deliver me from your hand, O King. How do we usually think God is going to do it? He's going to deliver me before I get into the trouble, right? He's going to deliver me before the pressure comes. That's how we think. God's going to cut this off, and I'm not going to have to endure that. But to do that sometimes would be a great misjustice to us. They didn't know what the outcome was going to look like, but they knew their God was going to be there with them. They didn't know what the outcome was going to be. You think it was in their mind that when they throw us in this fire, Jesus is going to be there waiting, and we're just going to walk out of this furnace just like we walked here? I don't think that ever entered their mind. I really don't. They couldn't fathom that. You don't know how God's going to do it. You don't know what the outcome's going to be. We have a preconceived idea of what the outcome's going to look like, but you really don't know. And the outcome that God has planned for you is greater than the one that you've imagined. So don't be so dedicated to the imagined outcome and then sell yourself short. True obedience will always bring you to the point of no return. True obedience will always bring you to the point of no return. It's like once I take this step, there is no turning back. There's no changing it. Once I make this move, that's it. I've done it. Now I either trust God or it all falls to pieces. God either comes through or it's over for me. That's true obedience. That's where I want to be, but that's a scary place. Yeah. I want to be there. That reminds me of, look, I took that step when I left the refinery, and I don't want to keep going back to that big deal, whatever. I obeyed. Hoorah. But shortly after that, because of my entitlement to the promises of God, I made that statement to God about Him providing me. I gave up this financial security for you, God. Man, what a foolish prayer. Now, what I expect from you is, what a dummy. I'm embarrassed to even admit that I prayed that way. And I asked Him for financial security. And His response to me hit me right in the gut. And He said, why? So you don't have to trust me anymore? Yeah, God, that's really what I was asking. Really, honestly, yeah, that's right. Because you know what? Sometimes living by faith will wear on you. It will just wear on you. And sometimes it's just so much easier to just have it than to have to believe for it. But how great the walk when you don't know where your heel's going to land in your next step. But you have to know that if God didn't place something solid under it, I'm about to fall on my face. Scary. Oh, yeah. But so rewarding. But so fulfilling. So true obedience will always bring you to that place, of that point of no return. You'll have to say, well, this is it. I can't turn back. I'm going ahead in obedience no matter what happens. Here I go. I don't know what this is going to end up like, but I know my God is leading me. I don't know what lays ahead, but I know He's leading me forward, and He's promised me He'll never leave me. This looks scary. This fire feels hot. But I know He'll not fail me. I know my God is faithful. I know He's not giving up on me. I know He's not walking out on me. I know my God is faithful. And no matter how scary this gets, He's going to hold on to me, and He's not going to let me fail. The world will, like I said, the world will always try to get you to compromise. Give in a little here, give in a little there. Just bow a little bit, and you can get out of this jam. And that's why the church has gotten to the point where we are. Because we compromised a little here and a little there. We gave a little ground here and a little ground there. We didn't want to look foolish during the interview. We didn't want to say things that offended somebody. We didn't want to make a comment that would make people leave the church. We didn't want to rock the boat. We have to surrender to the fire. We have to allow God to defend us in spite of the heat. If I defend myself, I miss the miracle. If I defend myself, do I have the right? Yeah. But when I do, I miss the miracle. Because God intended for so much more. Look, if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, what would happen if they defended themselves? What would have happened? Do I think they were mighty men? Absolutely. Do I think they were strong men? Absolutely. What would happen if they had defended themselves? I don't know. They may have got away. They may have escaped. But the glory of God would not have been revealed to the nation of Babylon. They may have escaped. They may have got loose, man. They may have lived life on the run all the rest of their lives. But the glory of God would not have been revealed to Babylon. An evil king wouldn't have stood up and said, I see Jesus. And anyone who don't serve Him, I'm going to cut you to pieces. Man, that was the king of one of the mightiest nations on earth at the time. And God changed the whole nation in a moment when these young men were willing to surrender their life to a trial by fire. Look at Daniel 3, 24 and 25. King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished, and he rose and he spoke in haste, saying to his counselors, did we not cast 3 men into the midst of the fire? And they said, true, O king. Look, he answered, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire. It's in the fire that people are going to see Jesus in your life. Because there are people that are watching you, and they're not interested in your life when everything's going well. They want to see how you're going to handle the adversity. They're going to see how you conduct yourself when all hell comes against you. They're going to see how you respond when people say ugly things about you. They're going to see how you respond when you get a negative report. Then how do you respond? Yeah, you serve your God when everything's going great, but how do you serve? How do you serve Him? What does it look like when you get a bad report? What does it look like when everything's gone south? Let me tell you something. If you stay faithful, that's when people will see Jesus in your life. That's when the glory of God will be revealed in your life. That's when people can look in from the outside and say, I see Jesus in that situation with them. I see Jesus just in the way they don't lose their confidence. I know what they're going through. I know what they're facing. I know what they're dealing with. And their faith is not shaken. I see Jesus in them. The only thing that was burned up was the things that had them bound. What a great promise. What a great promise. That was the only thing that consumed was the ropes that they tied them up with. God said, I'll bring you through a fire, and the only thing you lose is those things that had you bound. So you can come out of there free. You can come out of there delivered. The whole purpose for the fire is to remove the things that have you bound. That's the whole purpose. Is to remove the things that have you bound. Does that make it a happy place? No. But it helps you keep your sanity. When you can look in that situation and say, man, I'm walking through hell. But when I come out, the only thing I'm losing is the things that had me bound anyway. And while I'm in here, somebody's going to see Jesus in my life. Someone's going to see Jesus reflecting in me when I walk through this fire. When you come out, you'll be a walking testimony to the glory of God. Look what happened there. It's a picture for us on this side. When they came out of the fire, they were a walking testimony. Everywhere they went, you think people didn't know who they were? That's the guys that didn't burn. Actually, they were promoted, and the king gave them much more authority in the land. They weren't bound anymore. Man, that's the guys I want running my stuff. God's on their side. I'm talking to you now, not just them then. Look what their life was like after they came out of the fire. God's glory was revealed in them. And that from that day forward, they were a walking testimony. That reminds me of you, Luke. When you went through fire, Stacy, y'all went through fire. But God's glory was revealed. And from that day forward, you're a walking testimony to the glory and goodness of God. And they're not the only ones. Because that shouldn't have worked that way. When you got one artery free in your brain and it busts, the outcome's not supposed to be what they got. But God. But God. The only people who died that day were the ones that threw them in the fire. That gives me a little bit of satisfaction right there. I don't know. I don't know. That's twisted. But, man, look, if somebody had to die that day, they were prime candidates. God's saying, look, man, those people that threw you in there, don't worry about them. I'm going to deal with them. I'm going to deal with them. You don't worry about it. I got a way of dealing with it that's so much better than the way you were going to deal with it. Don't worry about the people that throw you in the fire. That's who we want to come against, right? At least I do. This is the only thing in that gives me satisfaction in not vindicating myself. Anyhow, I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what fire you have gone through, what you will go through, or what you may be going through now. But I do know this. Jesus is in there with you, and he'll never leave you nor forsake you. And if you remain faithful and surrender to his purification process, you will come out not even smelling like smoke. And those around you will see Jesus revealed through you. What a promise. What a promise.